Good evening, everyone. As it is 6:30, I suggest that the leadership team begins. And as always, I'd like to begin with 72 seconds silence to remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy. Before we go into silence for 70 seconds, can I just ask you just to check your mobile phones or your iPads or computers just to make sure that nothing bleeps? Okay. Thank you. Okay, apologies from absence. We have apologies from Anne Siren and Emma Will. Are there any declarations of interest? No? Okay, there's only one thing on the agenda this evening, which is, as you'll see, paper A3, and the report's title is to implement recommendations from the Stage 2 of the Grenfell Soil Sampling Environmental Checks Programme. So, Johnny, could you just introduce this, please?
Thanks, Elizabeth. So to introduce this bit, in October 2018, the government announced that a programme of environmental checks would be carried out to investigate any risks to human health because of the Grenfell fire tragedy, including from potential land contamination. The results from Stage 2 were published by MHCLG earlier this month, and soil sampling had been undertaken at 45 site locations during Stage 1 and Stage 2. These did not identify any detectable concentrations in soil that could be linked only to the Grenfell fire tragedy, and at 43 of the 45 site locations, no further action is required under Part 2A. There are 2 sites where the findings show elevated levels of contamination, not linked to the fire, but likely to be the result of historic land use and activity which does require further investigation under Part 2A of the Environmental Protection Act 1990. These 2 sites are Treadgold House in the west and the south of the site, and Avondale Park Gardens. Further sampling and assessment is required here, but there is no change to the existing health advice from Public Health England, which is to follow general good practice for urban soils. In addition to these 2 sites, there are some other sites where the Council is suggesting some informal, localised mitigation measures. The Council is now looking at appointing an environmental specialist to finalise and implement a sampling strategy for the 2 sites, and the specialist consultant will also identify what, if any, remediation is required. One of the main purposes of this paper is to set out the options for doing this, and the preferred option is to extend the existing contract that's in place for Stage 2 and award the work to AECOM, who have the breadth of knowledge having conducted the first 2 stages of the investigation. It will also ensure continuity and prompt action, since the full quotation and procurement process would result in further delay. During Stage 1 and Stage 2, to provide additional scientific scrutiny and assurance, MHCLG appointed a suitably qualified person, Dr. Paul Nathaniel, who is an independent consultant and oversaw AECOM's work. For continuity and continued assurance, it's recommended that he will be appointed to continue as the SQP for the further investigation. Stage 1 and Stage 2 of the investigation was funded by MHCLG. As the next stage of works relates to historic contamination and is not connected with the fire, the Council has a statutory duty to carry out these works, and therefore will be responsible for these costs. It's estimated that the site investigation works will be no greater than £35,000, and this amount does not include costs associated with any remediation that might be identified. The costs for the SQP are in the process of being obtained, but it's anticipated that it will be less than £15,000. So that's sort of setting the scene, as it were.
Thank you, and I appreciate it's a fairly technical piece of work, this, Johnny, so maybe you want to speak to officers. But on 1.7, there's a comment on that the assessment indicates the risk to health from lead might be greater than low, which sort of leads you to wonder, what does that mean in the context of sort of layman's speak, effectively? What does greater than low mean, really?
Can I suggest that Becky Brown answers that, who is our contaminated land expert?
So elevated levels of lead have been found, and because there are just in particular one part of Treadgold House, for example, it's just in the south and the west of the site. Sorry, may I remove my mask? Thank you. There have only been a few samples that have been taken there, and therefore there is a greater level of uncertainty as to know what that risk is. Therefore, we can't with confidence say that the risk is low. It may be greater than low. We need to carry out this further sampling and assessment in order to determine that.
Thank you, Johnny. In 6.4, when we talk about stage 2 of the works obviously now being completed, we engage with obviously other resident associations, schools, association groups, etc. And that. In regards to this element, stage 3, if we want to call it that, for the statutory duty we have, will we be doing the same? Will we be communicating directly to community or perhaps residents around the sites where we are, just to let them know that what the council is intending to do with this independent soil sample?
Yes, indeed. The work has been led to date by MHCLG, and they have agreed to continue to keep a watching brief. But we have a communications plan and an engagement plan, and that will continue. And Becky Brown has already been in touch with all the site owners to start talking about what mitigations and management might be required.
I was just going to ask, and I think the proposed approach, which is keeping with the people that we've already used, seems totally sensible, although, as you know, I like everything to go out to tender all the time, but in this instance not. I just wanted to check one thing, because obviously public confidence and resident confidence is absolutely paramount in all of this, and it talks about extending the appointment or the direct appointment of Dr. Nathaniel. Are you convinced that he is a trusted person and therefore suitable to be the suitably qualified person for our purposes here?
Yes, I am. He's a renowned expert, highly regarded throughout the country as far as I'm concerned. He also has met with residents and has attended site walkovers and overseen the sampling. So he has developed some relationship with residents, and I would hope that his continued presence would provide that reassurance that I know everyone is seeking.
Thank you. Actually, my question was very similar to Mary's, but actually about ACOM, and I just wanted to ask whether there had been any complaints or ideas of dissatisfaction about the work that they'd done so far, or if anyone had raised any issues about them as a company as well, doing the work that they've already done. Thank you.
During stage 2, which is where I have been involved, I am not personally aware of any complaints. MHCLG is the organisation that has been leading this programme, so it is possible that residents may have been in touch with MHCLG directly, but no complaints have been brought to my attention.
Thank you. And also it does say that the MAP has reviewed the proposals in the report and they're quite happy with it too, right?
Correct. We did submit our draft proposals as to how we intend to proceed following this publication, and they have continued, or they have said that they will have a continued oversight as to what we propose to do. The exact detail, that will be down to the consultant to design a sampling strategy, which we will then again share with MAP.
Thank you. Kim?
Yes, thank you. So just a quick question just in terms of resident concern, you know, because I very much remember the first meeting I went to, which was an outdoor meeting before we went on to zone, and the upset and concern of residents. But I noticed you've obviously had some online meetings, and attendance of those have declined until obviously the last one, which was on the 8th of July, and you say here that 11 questions were posted. Could you just outline what sort of questions and concerns you're still getting from the last meeting? From the residents? Thank you.
I have to say that since the event that MHCLG has hosted, I haven't personally received any, but I am aware that they held a drop-in session on Saturday, and there is actually a second drop-in session taking place this coming Friday. And I have been informed that I think only 4 residents attended that drop-in session, 2 of whom I think then struck up a conversation with MHCLG and ACOM. At the meeting, when the results themselves were announced on the 8th of July, where those 11 questions were posed, there were concerns about children attending Kensington Academy and general concerns about what was found at Treadgold House specifically, and Avondale Park Gardens. But since then, I personally haven't received any additional questions.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to hear that because, like Kim, I remember very well that residents were incredibly worried, and rightly so. You know, if you've experienced a very large fire nearby and you've seen the smoke and things, of course you're looking at the soil and thinking, you know, is it safe? So I'm very glad actually in the reports that you've put that, you know, the results from stage 1, that the level of chemicals found with stage 1, that it was typical of those generally found in London, and that again in stage 2, where there are elevated levels of contamination, but again, not obviously linked to the fire. So I think that's good news, but it does mean, you know, it's absolutely right that we should continue looking at, you know, Treadgold and Avondale Park Gardens, where we're not quite sure what the contamination level's like, even if it's not linked to the fire, that, you know, if there's any, you know, given the history and given the worry and the concern, it's quite right that we should carry on and investigate that. And I think it's absolutely right that we should look at more informal things a bit further afield. It just seems sensible, and Bolton Braces, and it seems very sensible to use ACOM, who residents know and whom they may have begun to trust, and the same with Paul Nathaniel, because, you know, these things, relationships are built up over years, and it seems very sensible. But Mo, I don't know if you've got something that you want to comment on or to add or to question.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would like to go back to point 1.7, like Councillor Kamali. Am I right by saying that by doing further tests and examination, we will understand the nature and the degree of the contamination, and could be linked with past activities on both sides? And my second question is, did we run a thorough test on everywhere in the borough, or do we need to do that in the future after doing this?
I've already forgotten the first part of the question, sorry. The nature and the extent of the lead? will we be sure that once the investigation's concluded? That, right. So at the moment, the other sites have all been classed as Category 4. With these 2 remaining sites, we are unclear whether they are Category 3 or 4, and as a result of this investigation, that will be determined. So yes, we will know the extent of the lead contamination. There will be a thorough sampling investigation or sufficient sampling to be able to make that decision, and then the consultant will recommend what remediation, if any, is required to ensure that the contamination is remediated.
The second question?
And the second question.
Yes, could you repeat it, please?
The second question is about the borough-wide. Do we need to check everywhere in the borough, wherever we think there is a spot it might be contaminated? Do we need to do that?
So the purpose of stage 2, stage 1 and stage 2, was to look at the risk from the fire. And the sites were carefully chosen by AECOM. They couldn't test the whole borough. Even the north of the borough. They looked at the Met Office plume where debris had fallen, and they picked sites which were accessible. And as a result of that, they have found, as you know, that these 2 sites, due to historic contamination, that there is a further piece of work that is required. Now, local authorities do have a duty from time to time to inspect their land, and when new evidence comes to light, then that's when they have the duty to carry out further sampling and investigation. It would be impossible to test every piece of soil, and what you will find is that a lot of London, certainly urban soils, do have elevated levels of contamination. But when you get new evidence, just has come to light today, that is when you take those extra steps to carry out the additional sampling.
Marie-Thérèse.
Just to say, this KD has been circulated to the OSC, and I think the general feeling is it proceed as set out in the report. But just to say that the last meeting we had in OSC concerning contaminated land, where there was quite a lot of anxiety, it seemed that a lot of the worry was not really about contaminated land as such, but to do with the health impacts of breathing smoke in on the night. And so in adult social care and health, they will be looking at it in a different way, because those were the concerns that really came out in the meeting, as far as I could see.
Thank you. But with regard to this report, which is in front of us
with regard to this, everyone is very happy with this report. But just to say that that will be looked at in another one of the select committees.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. If there are no other questions or nothing else anyone wants to raise, can I ask you to turn your attention to the recommendations in paragraph 2, which is really to proceed with the required Part 2A investigation at Treadgold House and Avondale Park Gardens, and the proposed follow-up voluntary action at other sites. The second thing we're asked to approve is a waiver from the Council's contract regulations, so that we can approve a contract extension to the 25th of Feb 2022 of the existing Stage 2 contract with AECOM to carry out additional soil sampling, risk assessment, and identification of any further, any required remediation to investigate historical contamination identified during the Stage 1 and Stage 2 works, which are laid out in paragraphs 1.6 and 1.7, and that this does not alter the overall nature of the existing contract. And the third thing we're asked to recommend and to agree is a waiver from the Council's contract regulations, so that we can directly appoint Dr. Paul Nathaniel, the suitably qualified person for independent scrutiny of this stage of the work. And finally, I'd like you to note that there may be other ancillary costs associated with the next stage of works, and if so, the Executive Director of Environment and Communities, Mrs. Sue Harris, will consider them and approve them under delegated powers. Do we agree all those recommendations? Agreed? Thank you very much. Is there any other business? No? I declare the meeting closed. Thank you.